Hello, I'm Peter Towers, founder and managing director of ESS BIZTOOLS. Welcome to the ESS BIZTOOLS podcast. This is the start of a series which we have produced as part of Black Friday, but we're carrying it on so you can understand the concept of the innovation journey. And we've called it Lead SMEs Through the Innovation Journey. They need accountants and bookkeepers who are interested in supplying this type of service, advice and assistance, encouragement. And they need you to be identifying to your clients that you're interested and able to assist them on this journey. So it all starts with an idea. It might be a very small idea at first. It could be an apprentice on a factory floor. It could be someone in an office that thinks of an idea and says, there's got to be an easier way of doing this. How else can we do it? And they come up with an idea. They might think about it overnight, wake up at 3 a.m., thinking about it, writing some notes up, doing some drawings. And then they turn up the next day and go and approach their supervisor or their foreman and say to him, what do you think about this idea? This would save us time and energy, save money every day in our process. Or it might be something else. It might be a brand new product idea that could be manufactured and sold. Not necessarily by your client's company, of course. They could develop it to a final prototype and then either sell it on or sell a license for other people to produce it and pay them royalties. So it can be a defining moment in the life of a business, this development of intellectual property. So it starts with an idea. Your client has a spark. So it's where we go from here. But you might be saying to your clients that there is a thing called the research and development tax offset. And you may have mentioned it to this particular client some time ago. And he or she remembers that and says, okay, I will need to go and talk to my accountant about this to see what we can do. So if you're a subscriber to ESS BIZTOOLS on your desk, on your computer, you would have a link to our website and you can immediately go into it and ask for research and development introduction. This is the introduction package which we've produced to assist to answer these initial questions, to refresh your memory. Oh yes, it's got to be a company and there needs to be at least $20,000 of legitimate research and development expenditure spent in the financial year. And there's record keeping requirements because the client has got to undertake research activities. Now let's destroy a myth right here. As I said, the client has to undertake research activities. The key word was client has to undertake them, not you. I've had accountants say to me, oh, Pete, we couldn't get involved in research and development. I say, why not? And the answer I'd get would be, well, I'm not a scientist or an engineer. I said, well, what's that got to do with it? I know you're an accountant. Well, who's going to do the experiments? And my response is definitely not you. It's not your responsibility. It's your client's. And you need to make sure your client understands that. You're not there to do the research and development activities. They do them themselves. They employ their team to do them. I had one client with a very big research and development project, had about 35 people working for them. A lot of them were overseas students or graduates in Australia for a year or two before they went back home and settled down to their careers. But it wasn't me as the advisor doing any of the work, but your role is more akin to being an internal auditor, because there is a range of documents that have to be prepared, because records have got to be kept. And if you're undertaking research activities on a daily basis, every day there needs to be records kept. They're basically timesheets. Who did what? What did they discover from that work? It's experimentation that the government is paying an incentive to companies to undertake. So they need to keep substantiation. The government's just not going to accept that they did 1,000 hours of work. They need it documented. They need it signed by the team members that undertook the process. But you need it properly documented, because if there's a audit by the tax office or AusIndustry, which is the other government department involved in this, and it might be 3 or 4 years later, bit hard to say, well, yeah, we had someone doing that, but they were from Germany or France or England or Ireland, and they've gone back home. And even if they hadn't gone back home, it's too long, too far down the track to ask them to remember exactly what they did. So you need to make sure the client understands his records. Now you might say, well, where am I going to get all those forms from? Well, don't worry. ESS BIZTOOLS has produced all of those. In fact, there's 48 separate forms in our system. We've gone through and studied the legislation and picked out everything that someone may need to keep a record of. I don't think you'll have any one client that needs 48 separate forms. But if you handle 10 to 15 clients in a year on research and development, you might use all those forms. But even then, I'll find it will be a very rare occurrence. So the systematic records need to be kept from day one. And your role, I believe, is to set up a monthly review of what's happened. You check the records, make sure they're so that the month, in fact, can be signed off, and we roll over then into the next month of the record keeping. So most SMEs respond to all this once they understand how it works. So step one is determining whether what they're going to be creating is new knowledge, because the government's not going to subsidise Australian businesses to go out and reinvent the wheel. If someone somewhere in the world has already invented it and registered for patent registration in their country, and then if they're serious, it'll be registered in the USA, you can't claim that. Your client can do something similar, but they won't be able to claim it. So to do that, there needs to be some online research done and records kept of what they discovered from the online research, because remember, it might be a few years' time when an inquiry's been raised by the tax office about some of this. You want to be able to substantiate, the client needs to be able to substantiate what they did to ascertain that no one else had done this. So they need to clearly define the search engine wording that they put in and keep the responses that they printed out and date them and keep a file of them. They could engage special consultants to undertake this work. There are people around, mainly in the capital cities, who are experts in various fields of technology, and they can do the research. Patent attorneys are a good source because they understand the overall process and they can check it out. Now, if no patent exists, that's a green light. You can go ahead if you think it's going, or your client can, if they think it's going to be worthwhile. And the important thing is there's no requirement for any sort of government department approval at this stage. Your client just starts. The first lot of registration normally is after the 30th of June, so at the end of that financial year, unless your client wants to get prior approval from the tax office and AusIndustry, they do it together, on a particular project. You can apply in advance and get an approval in advance, which might last for 3, maybe 4 years. This is the project. Just got to make sure your client does the work exactly as specified in what was submitted to the tax office. And the only other area you would apply first is if your client wants to do some of the research activities overseas. But a warning, it's very difficult to get approval for that process. You basically got to prove it is definitely not possible to undertake particular research in Australia. Now, that might be because of government regulations in Australia, or it might be because the climatic conditions for something are just not here and people have got to go overseas, but it's very difficult. So we're now starting to say to the client, well, this could be a serious R&D project. So they need to understand that they need to identify the core R&D activities. They need to be able to identify the new knowledge they intend to create. But remember, none of this is getting submitted to the government departments at this stage. They are quite entitled to change their mind as they start, but they need to keep records from day one. And you, as the internal auditor, need to make sure they've done that, you've documented, you've got it in a file. And there needs to be technical uncertainties about what they're doing, because why else would the government be making an incentive payment? And they need to identify the hypothesis that they're going to try to prove or disprove. And just another comment on the way through. Just because the experiment doesn't work out the way your client might have hoped it would work out, doesn't mean that the tax offset is lost. I've had some people ring me at times and say, well, it didn't work and the client spent 30 hours on this, but that's all down the drain. I said, what do you mean it's down the drain? Do you keep the records? Have you got the whole process in place, the way we discussed, the way the ESS BIZTOOLS system spells it out? And he said, yes. I said, well, you can claim it. The government knows that everything's not going to be proven. There's a lot of dry gullies in research that people need to go up and down at times before they'll find the correct answer. You can claim all that time as long as it is documented and the processes of finding that it was a legitimate project in the first place have been undertaken. So the next steps, step 3, we need to plan. I like the concept of a research and development plan, but it's not legally required for a company with a turnover less than $20 million. It is for all companies over $20 million in turnover. I think it's a great precaution that everyone's thinking along the line so that the director or directors has got some idea of what all this might be going to cost and what's it going to be involved, that he's allowing certain of his team to spend 10, 20 hours a week on research activities. That all can add up to fairly cost. And I like the idea of a project budget also, which again is not legally required, but it's the sort of thing we should be suggesting to our clients. Sit down and think this through at the beginning. How many man hours do you think are going to be involved? Do you need to hire external consultants? They might need external contractors or universities or research organisations to do part of the process. What are they going to do? And once you start going down this path, you've got to also be talking to your client about protecting the intellectual property. They may need to go off and talk to their solicitor. They need to check the agreements that they have with their current team members who are going to be involved in the project. They need to have a lawyer look at, or an expert in human resources contracts, to see whether their current employment agreement covers them for confidentiality and protection of intellectual property if individual team members are brought into the team that's working on the research and development activities. And most certainly they need those types of protections for any contractor or consultant that is working on the project, because this could end up being a very valuable product for your client. And we need to be protecting it from day one. There should be a board report. The legislation requires that a report's been submitted to the board of directors. When the government first planned all the research and development regulations many years ago, they only envisaged the big end of town companies being involved and universities. But over the years, SMEs have been a lot more involved. In fact, over 6,100 companies with a turnover less than $10 million participated in research and development activities in 2022-23, and another 1,000 approximately also participated, but their turnovers were between 10 million and 20 million. So 7,000, it represented 46% of the total participation in research and development. So there's a lot of SMEs doing it. Now, some accountants might be surprised at that because I've had accountants say to me, oh, none of our clients are interested in it. I think being negative in response to SMEs, not encouraging them, has perhaps driven some of these entrepreneurial thinkers who may now be scaling up to bigger companies to go to Big Four and special consultancy firms. Now, you could stop that happening if you're keen to be involved in participating in the innovation journey, because the innovation journey starts with that idea and then starts going through the research and development process. So the opportunity is huge, and it presents so many more things besides research and development, which is what we're going to discuss in this series of podcasts over the next few weeks. So stage one, we're looking at making sure the client understands the rules, understand what's involved. Within ESS BIZTOOLS, we have a special product which we call the Research and Development Introduction to assist you to take your client through all that. There's links to various articles which we've written. There's a fantastic spreadsheet, FC050, which enables you to show them on a chart how the whole process links together that I've quickly explained to you, so that the client can understand what it's all about and understand that records need to be kept. So please don't think you've got to be an engineer or a scientist to undertake this role. You just take the view that you're going to do the recording as the internal auditor, and that will make it a lot easier. So undertaking the R&D work can be very important. It involves looking at prior art, deciding whether the patents need to be registered or trade secret agreements registered. And you will need to look at building an R&D team. There's going to be confidentiality agreements. The claiming of the research and development expenditure, the legitimate expenditure, is 43% for companies under $20 million turnover. So that's calculated at an 18% plus 25% corporate tax rate, 43% of the expenditure. And that becomes a tax offset. But if your company turnover under $20 million is trading at a loss, they can make an application in their tax return for the cash equivalent of the research and development tax offset, as long as their losses exceed that amount, to be refunded to them by the tax office. And the tax office normally make that payment within 30 days of the company's tax return being lodged. So we then move on to the prototype, because something's being developed, and that's the prototype. Now, I've had a lot of experience with the development of prototypes, and there can be a lot of dry gullies, I can assure you. The client thinks they've got it finished, and then we go into having further research undertaken. We have forums of people looking at them, and we look at what's required. And sometimes the feedback can be quite devastating from one of these focus groups, because people are looking at it from a very practical purpose. The focus group, you should try to get half a dozen, 10 people who know something about the industry the product's going to be used in, and get them to have a look at what your client thinks might be the final prototype. And over the years, when I was a business advisor to the federal government's COMET program, Commercialising Emerging Technology, I found that people had prepared their final prototype. It looked great. They held it up and everyone looked at it. And then someone picked it up and looked at it and said, it won't work. Why won't it work? And went on to explain. I must admit, most of those people were ladies. And most of the time they were correct too. So it was back to the drawing board. So there needs to be this process, because you don't want to go into full production and then find it doesn't fit where it's supposed to go, or won't connect to the electricity or whatever. So we then start thinking about how all this is going to get funded. Has your client got enough money? And there is a very interesting government grant, which is called the Industry Growth Program. which is available, and it's part of the National Reconstruction Fund, and grants range from $50,000 to $5 million, but your client's got to match it. So the first one is to look at protecting the basic idea and making funds available of between $50,000 and $300,000 to enable the process to go through. So that's very important, and you need to be having a look at that. We then move into the business plan, because the business plan needs to be developed that outlines what the vision is. Because if you're going to go to a government department and try to get a major grant like the ones I just mentioned, you need to have a plan which can be submitted to the government, which outlines the whole process. So that's the introduction to the innovation journey. We're going to continue this story in a series of podcasts. If you want more information, please contact us, peter@essbiztools.com.au. We have a special promotion as part of Black Friday that this program was developed for, and it's continuing until Monday, the 15th of December. So you've still got time. 75% discount. That's an unbelievable figure. Originally, we were going to offer 50%, but then we started looking at the problems that small businesses have got. We read the Ombudsman's latest report, and it's not very smart in that SMEs around Australia, about half of them are in difficulty, according to that report. So we decided to add another 25% as a carrot to you as accountants and bookkeepers to get actively involved in this process. I can assure you your rate of return on that investment, only $1,050 for a year, including GST, for our top line product, which we normally sell at $4,200 for a year. We're offering that through to the 15th of December. So please take advantage of it. This is your opportunity to get in on the ground floor of helping companies grow. 7,000 Australian companies participated in the research and development program in 2022-23. I'm not sure yet what the number's going to be for 23-24. The tax office haven't released that. But that might give you some idea of the volume. And not many accountants are getting involved in it. So there's a great opportunity. And what it leads to is significant more work. Because in future commentaries on the innovation journey, we're going to look at the internal financial arrangements, how the business is organised, what reports they get, what KPIs, what business details they get. We're going to look at capital raising, crowdsource funding, equity raising, early stage innovation company, Section 708, a whole range of things which all lead through to an ultimate overview of the virtual Chief Financial Officer services that I think if you subscribe to ESS BizTools and implement our strategies, you are able to develop. Have a great day, and I look forward to hearing from you. Goodbye.